talk about physics. Well, welcome to this is the welcome friends. This is the DPZ show. With me, I have Matthew at 1956ToppsGuy, and we are talking about the Grails once again. This is the was it 1, 2, 3? It's the fourth installment of the Grail series, and I am very, very honored and flattered to have Matthew on here to talk about Mickey Mantle. And, really we can kind of group a lot of the vintage stuff back into that because there's so many cards that you can kind of put in that Grail category. Some of these major players from that era. So thank you for being on the show, Matthew. It's awesome to have you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dennis. I've been listening to all the episodes so far, so I'm in the language of the folks that you had on for Jordan. For you had Chris Hoge on, right? And you also had
Brian.
Brian.
Cajun,
they talked about how they were batting third, so I'm batting cleanup, right? With
you are.
Sounds appropriate.
It's totally appropriate. Yeah. What's funny though, what I didn't mention on that show, and I probably should have, is they were set to go like first, I think, and then we had scheduling conflicts a couple different times, and then Chris and I got sick and we weren't feeling very good, so we had to kind of push it. And so really, they were probably giving the first one out of the gate because we just kind of started talking first. I really had any intention of who's going first, second. I didn't really care. It's just whatever. But they kind of made a statement about that. I'm like, well, actually, guys, you were first. We just got it. We had to reschedule a couple of times. So, but yeah, you are batting fourth, which is very, very fitting for Mickey Mantle. Yeah. So talk, for those in the crowd that don't know your journey in sports cards. Why don't you give us like an origin story for 1956ToppsGuy?
Oh yeah, okay, yeah, I can do that pretty fast. So I was born in 1980, so a kid of the junk wax era is my
Nice.
What I grew up. So I collected cards, as a kid. I specifically remember being like just insanely in love with the 87 Topps Jose Canseco with the Rookie Cup card. Like that was the card I wanted really bad when I was like in third grade. And so, yeah, I was like a big Jose Canseco collector when I was a kid, like the whole 40-40 thing. Like, I don't know, I just love that stuff. And, I thought he was like such a cool and awesome guy. I didn't know about like the Madonna stuff. I didn't know about all the other stuff, but I remember, I remember when he got traded to the Rangers, I was like heartbroken because I was, I'm like, he's going to be on the A's forever, this kind of thing.
Sure.
But, also collected Griffey when I was a kid because he just like, so I grew up near Chicago. I'm wearing my 87 Cubs Andre Dawson jersey tonight. So I'm a big Cubs fan, but in that time frame, being 9 years old, opening a pack of Upper Deck and pulling a Ken Griffey Jr. out, looking up in the Beckett that it was worth $10, and then that was like mind blowing in those days, right?
Yeah.
So I basically like collected, those Canseco, McGuire, and Griffey, and all those folks through the junk wax era. Probably, built up a pretty big collection of those two guys, mostly like buying wax and doing some trading with my friends. It didn't really get any too expensive of cards, but I remember specifically like going to card shows at the Holiday Inn that was near my house in Chicagoland, and like seeing the vintage cards there, and my dad telling me about collecting Mickey Mantle as a kid, and seeing like opening the Beckett and seeing that the most expensive card in the Beckett was the 52 Topps Mantle, and I'd never seen one at that time, so it was and so it was always a cool card, and those were always cards that kind of I had put on this pedestal, like mentally, right? And then let's see, so I kind of dropped off collecting probably about 1996 or so, when I was about 16. Just got into other things, and then I came back to cards pretty soon after, when I was in graduate school, actually. So I would say came back to cards in about 2005. And I came back to cards because I had like a longtime girlfriend at that point in time, and it was coming around to my birthday, and she was asking me what I wanted, and I didn't want like a sweater. I didn't know what is this person getting me, and then I'm like, I used to love cards. Let me go onto eBay, and then that's when I saw like grading, and I could see, all of these things. But one thing that really stood out to me in that original eBay search was, I said, well, why don't I look at like how much is an old card? Because I remember old cards, vintage cards being really expensive when I was a kid. And I looked up, and I could see that I could get like I could get like a 1956 Topps Ernie Banks in like a PSA 7, like a near mint card for $100. And
Wow.
that blew my mind, right? Because
Yeah.
I was like, I remember Jose Canseco rookies being $100, right? When
Right?
I was a kid,
Yeah.
raw. And so I
Absolutely.
that was a thing of like learning about grading. And then I kind of decided, well, I want to collect vintage cards, and I want to collect Cubs cards. So then I just looked through just all the different sets from that era and tried to think about how much they would be to build a set and things like that. And eventually came to 1956 Topps as, okay, I'm going to try to build this set. It doesn't seem that expensive. And it seemed doable and fun. And I mean, from my perspective, it was like I was really taken in by the artwork. That was really what drew me to those cards. And I distinctly remember I was buying raw cards at that time to build the set. And I remember this must have been in probably like 2008 or so is when I bought a Mickey Mantle, my first 1956 Topps Mickey Mantle. And that was a big deal for me. That was a Grail card for me, at that time, because it was, if you're into vintage baseball cards, and we'll talk about this a lot more, like Mickey Mantle's the top of the mountain, right?
Right. Oh yeah. Oh, so absolutely.
Yeah. And so, I kind of like from probably about 2005 to about 2015, I pretty steadily, 10 years, just like slowly building up this 1956 top set, just a couple cards a month at a time. And then eventually, I find myself in 2016, the Cubs are having just an amazing run, right? It's been over 100 years since the Cubs won the World Series. And so at that point in time, I was, collecting these vintage cards. And I thought to myself, well, I have to get into modern cards, because like if I'm a card collector and I don't have any cards from 2016 and I'm a Chicago Cubs fan, like literally, what am I doing?
Right.
So that's kind of, that's kind of pushed me into Chicago Cubs land. And then later on in my collecting journey, I kind of branched out my vintage collection into some of the bigger cards, like the 52 Mickey Mantle, the Lou Gehrig, the Babe Ruth, the Ty Cobbs, and that's kind of where I'm focusing most of my energies these days, but also some 2016.
So what's really fun about your journey is like I have had very similar journey. I'm a 1980 kid too, so we're
Cool.
both exactly the same age. Being up here in Seattle, Ken Griffey Jr. was everything, but Jose Canseco was the guy. And as you just saw my 6-year-old son come down to probably say goodnight, notice I was on here, and loop, down he goes. So that'll be a really fun little add to the show. He of course he's into Ken Griffey Jr. like crazy, like me, but I got him like the Bash Brothers poster, because I used to have that Bash Brothers, but
I remember it.
Yeah, I had that as a kid. I went and bought one on eBay and I framed it. And I have the Bo Jackson where he's like this too. So he's got both of those, the iconic posters. I'm like forcing him to be basically me. It's not hard for him because he just loves it. He loves cards. He's all into it. But what's really cool about your moniker, your name, 1956 ToppsGuy, is the 1956 set is so iconic. But what's really great about 1956 and the fact that we're talking about Mickey Mantle is that's his Triple Crown year. I've read like 7 books on Mickey. So huge fan. I don't have any of his cards. I could dream to have one of his cards, but I feel like I probably could if I'd sold most of what I had. But his stuff is so sought after and so desirable. Like, do you think, I mean, I know 1956 is a cool set. And I remember those 80s, early 90s sets, they kind of had a play on the 56 with some of the current players. I vaguely remember that. Like they had some cards that came out that looked like 1956 Topps, like kind of reprints with current players. But is there a reason like Mickey Mantle, even like 1966 and 67 Topps cards, they just command like no other? Why do you feel like that is?
Yeah, so I really spent a lot of time thinking about this, and I'm not, I am a vintage card nerd. I'm not a total like Mickey Mantle like fanboy, but I do know a decent amount of them. And I think, part of the reason that Mickey Mantle plays such an important role in the hobby really requires you to think back to that time in American history, right? So we get out of World War II and we end up really in the rise of consumerism, right? When all of the GIs come back home, right? You've got all these baby boomer kids that are born in, 1946, like 1 year after the war ends. And so then you project, just a few years out from the end of the war, and then you've got Topps, kind of coming out with these gum cards that just look so beautiful compared to the Bowman cards, which I love those Bowman cards, but 1952 Topps created, a special moment, a landmark moment in the hobby. And then you have this landmark set that comes out, and at the same time, you have this player in the set in Mickey Mantle who, we'll talk about the card specifically, but, created such an important card of him that just looks beautiful aesthetically. But Mickey Mantle played a huge role in kind of post-war America in the sense that, right, the first televised World Series was 1947. But in that time frame, there was probably only like 10,000 television sets in all of America. But by the time we get to 1951, it's more than 10 million. And by the time we get to 1955, more than half the households in the country have a television set. And right, baseball is at its peak in the American consciousness. And you've got this farm boy from Oklahoma who came in with so much hype to pick up like the tradition from Joe DiMaggio as the Yankees center fielder, right? And he leads them to these, like, he was in 12 World Series over the course of his career, and he won 7 of them. And right, he holds the record for most home runs in a World Series at 18, which I assume will never be broken, right? That's a record that will never get there. So he was like a winner, and he really captured kind of the American consciousness in that time frame. And so you've got, all of these little boys who were baby boomer, the baby boomer children who he was their idol for so many years. And it's so interesting because he wasn't the best player of his generation. That I would say that's Willie Mays, almost inarguably. He wasn't the most impactful from a societal perspective. That's Jackie Robinson. But he's kind of at this really important nexus of being this kind of farm boy that everyone could kind of see themselves as, who was this great hero in New York. And I think that's part of what creates the kind of the iconicness of Mickey Mantle within the hobby.
So walk me through 1956 Topps for you. Why does that set hit you so hard? Why was that set so important to you and you needed to collect that one?
Yeah. So it's a combination of factors for 1956 Topps. So number one, 1956 Topps represents the end of an era in cards, in the sense that it's the last card set where the images aren't photos of players. It's the last set where the images are artist renditions of photographs. So if you want to throw up the picture of the 56 Topps again really fast, the one that you had a little bit ago, because I want to show you something that's kind of a cool thing about that card. When you click on that guy, and let's see if we can see a big picture.
It's taking a minute to load, but yeah.
Okay.
That's a really good point. I never thought about that. It's actually these are artists' renditions of the actual photos.
Yeah. So they're not. And it's the last set. So 57 is the first set where it's a photograph, but 56 is the very last set where it's an artist rendition. And so what we see here, when we look at the mantle in a zoomed in image, you can see how it's an artist rendition. So number one, you see the ball is landing right in his mitt. He's making the catch, right?
Yeah.
If you look at the original photograph, he's actually like nowhere near the ball. He doesn't make the catch on this play.
That's crazy.
So the other thing that you can see is, like, look at the guy right next to Mickey's hat who has the tie on. There's a guy like just to the left of Mickey's hat.
Yeah, right here.
A tie
right
on.
here. Yeah,
Yeah,
right
that
there.
guy. That guy is actually at the very left of the image too. You see at the very left.
Oh yeah, there he is.
There he is, right? So that whole row of people has been copied over to make it look like there are more people in the stands, right? You've got this row of people right next to his hat. They're looking the wrong direction, right? They're like looking at towards the direction of the portrait of Mantle, but everyone else is looking at the ball because that's where the action is, right? So I think
these guys aren't.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
So all three of these guys aren't looking at the ball. This is insane. I never thought we'd be digging in this deep, but I actually never knew this.
Yeah. So, but this is what makes it special, right? They've made an image that is it's more iconic than the real image was itself, right? They made a more fantastical image that tells a more compelling story than the original photo would have, right?
Right. I mean, and these are very, very expensive too. And so they feel like they hold some provenance within the collecting community, especially the vintage card collecting community. Why is that? Is that because it's that last set? Is it because they're harder to find and higher grade examples?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think 56 Tops holds a special place in the hobby because I'm pretty sure this is true that like the fraction of Hall of Famers that are in this set is the biggest of all sets ever.
Oh, okay.
But it also doesn't have any major rookie cards. So the most significant rookie in this set is Luis Aparicio, actually.
Wow.
And so a lot of the players, it's like they're like Clemente and Koufax, that's their second year card, right? Banks and Aaron, that's their third year card.
Yeah.
And so you've got, but the other thing that is cool about 56 Tops is that there is no other set where you get a combination of Mickey Mantle, Jackie Robinson, and Ted Williams all in one set. You get all of those guys in one set, and there's no other set that has that, which is pretty cool.
And you've got all of them, obviously, because I imagine you've collected the set, and you probably got it before they got ridiculous. It sounds since you've been 05, you were a smart guy. You're definitely ahead in all of it. So what grades do you have those 3 cards in, or all the major cards?
Yeah, so I have so I would say that I'm like kind of in the collector land rather than the investor land. So
yeah.
my Mickey Mantle, I'll show it right here. So my Mickey Mantle is a 6.5. So
jeez, hold on, let me get out. We got to stop sharing so we can see it.
Yeah, there we go.
Wow.
I have like a nice image of it if we want to look at that.
Yeah. No, that's actually really cool.
So this is 6.5. So this is kind of like yeah. So back in the day, it used to be that kind of like 7 and above was kind of considered investor grade. I think it might be different now. Like this 6.5 is a pretty expensive card. Like this is like
that. You kidding me?
Right,
yeah, you could probably buy a house with a 6.5, right? I mean, I haven't looked at any prices lately, but I can't imagine it's cheap at all. There's no barrier to get there anymore. And I don't see that going anywhere. I don't see that changing at all. I think those are the kind of cards where I think those are basically correct. They're going to be, the floor is established. Okay. And so you feel like you got into that card in a good spot and you feel probably pretty good about that. Was that the first one you got, or did you go Ernie Banks first and then go?
Yeah, Ernie Banks was the very first card that I got. And this mantle that I have is, I think it's maybe the 4th one. And I think that's another point I wanted to make. Like, maybe you had this discussion with some of the other guests about like, what is a Grail? Like, what does a Grail card mean?
Yeah.
And for me, I feel like I actually don't really, that term is just kind of a funky term because for me in the hobby, it connotes too much of a sense of finality. In the sense that like as a collector, it's never over. Like I have a 1956 Topps set, but I'm still buying 56 Topps cards to upgrade this or upgrade that.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
I like to kind of think of it more as like milestone cards. Like these are cards that like they're a specific place where you get along this longer journey, but it's kind of like an important marker of I've gotten somewhere, and I think like some of your previous guests have said, it's a card that can kind of stand alone as a foundational card. So like, it's a card that if you showed someone else in the hobby, they kind of will get a pretty good idea of like what kinds of stuff you collect just based on that one card alone, because it's so important. Right. And so I feel like my first 56 Topps mantle was this raw card, but I remember like getting it in the mail. I remember so specifically, like just staring at it like all night because I was so happy to get this card. And it really was, it was a landmark milestone in my progression within the hobby.
That's a really great way of explaining it. I know I'm focusing so much on your 1956 passion and just vintage in general, and then baseball, and then we're talking through the card itself. So those are all really cool deviations. As you can probably see at the very beginning, it was very poignant. Grail. We just walked through the cards, and then it's like, oh, let's have some discussions about all kinds of cards. And there's 3 different levels. And then the third one, we're talking about all kinds of things, and not even Grails anymore. And there's some people going, I thought this was about Jordan Grails. I'm like, I'm sorry, guys. I know we kind of went off the handle, and now we're just talking about 1956. I mean, this discussion definitely can have some formation and some guidelines and bumper rails, but ultimately, I want to talk about the Grails, but I think with Mickey Mantle, there's like a couple. So it's going to be kind of hard to talk about one card forever. His Grail card is his 52 Topps, and I just don't think there's really much else out there. So the bigger discussion, I believe, and I wanted to have with you is just that time frame, 1956, the cards from that era and why they matter so much. And we've kind of covered some of that. And then talking about what your personal, 1956, that's a big deal. That's cool to uncover that. But your comments on Grails is interesting. That's the first time I've ever heard it being presented in such a way, because you're right. The finality of any collection, no one's really ever done. I can't imagine. I think I have one card I've had for more than a year in my PC. I mean, I keep upgrading it and turning it into something a little bit better. And it's like you have to shift and change and trade and consolidate to do that. And then to the point where you're buying, very interesting cards, like I was talking about at the very beginning of the show. Like, I'm going to do this, but then I'm doing this, but then I change my mind. I'm going to go here, and but that's kind of the fun of it, right? And the fun aspect, the interesting aspect of that is you can change and shift, and you can pivot, and then you can sell it, and then you can kind of start over, right? There is some liquidity to it. You're not always going to get what you pay. And I feel like as collectors, sometimes we just kind of look the other way, like, I got a little bit less, but that's okay. I'm going to apply it to this, and it's going to all work out. I've kept a spreadsheet, and I've said this to some certain people. Like I have it down to the penny, like of what I've spent since I got in, what I've sold, and where I'm at, and what's, my conservative worth of the PC as it keeps changing. And I know exactly where I'm at, what I've spent, and what I would literally have in my bank account right now if I hadn't done X, Y, and Z. And in a fire sale, how much would probably lose, which you never want to do anyway. So I've tried to approach it from that perspective. I think, and certain collectors are like, I couldn't do that. I buy too many things. So you got in early. So you've probably so talk to me about, before we get into the Grail conversation with Griffey, or not Griffey, sorry, Freudian slip, Mantle. Talk to me about, like, you bought all these 56. Did you put your whole set together before the boom, or were you still trying to accumulate through the boom? Or did you take advantage of maybe selling some lower stuff to get some bigger, to kind of upgrade your set and take advantage of some of the stuff you had?
Yeah, it's a great question. So yeah, I had completed the set, I would say in 2015, 2016, I was kind of done with the set. But there's always, at that time, I had all raw cards, except for a few slab cards I kind of picked up on along the way. And then I was kind of at around 2016, I was like, you know what? I think I want to make sure that all of my Hall of Famers end up in some kind of a graded, this kind of graded card, just because if something were to happen to me and somebody wanted to sell it's just a lot easier to not get shafted if the card's been graded, right?
Absolutely.
And so I ended up at that point, like, submitting a bunch of my cards to PSA and SGC. Some of them came back with grades I was happy with. Some of them came back with grades I wasn't so happy with. But at that time, like, prices were kind of steadily rising, right? We hadn't really hit the 2020, like, huge ramp up. And probably from 2016 to about 2018, I replaced most of my Hall of Famers with PSA around, between like 6 and 7 for my key Hall of Famers. And in doing that, basically, it's really easy for me as a collector to be like, look, I have this Mickey Mantle that's a PSA 5. I really like this PSA 6.5. Does it make sense to me to just add in a little bit more money to, like, move up to a card I like a lot more in terms of its eye appeal and grade? And that's something else that we should talk about, like in vintage land, the importance of eye appeal of the card. And for me, that was always easy, because I'm like, okay, this card's gone up a lot in value. I'm happy to, like, sell it off, put a little bit more money in, and then upgrade to, something that I like more. But, the same card, just either a higher grade or better eye appeal. So I kind of did that, which was kind of me selling off stuff, but also me putting more money in to, like, really get the examples like I really, really wanted. And so that kind of happened pre-pandemic for me.
That happened pre-pandemic, and so you kind of rode the wave through the pandemic. So when you completed the whole set, was it raw, or did you get it all graded, or you just got the Hall of Famers graded? That's the only one.
So right now it's a little bit of a mix. So all the Hall of Famers are graded, and some of the key other players like Billy Martin and some other folks that aren't in the Hall of Fame but are big players, they're graded. But then for me, like, I didn't really see an advantage to, like, having all of the commons. So there's 342 cards in the set. And I'm not going to spend 300, I'm going to grade 300 common cards. Like, that doesn't make sense to me. So actually, I have them in a binder. and I can just flip through that thing and look at all the cards
Nice.
and the set. It's really fun. I mean, I
That
like it
is
for,
fun.
yeah, I like it for the art. I like, it's fun to like take the card out and you get that kind of library kind of old paper smell,
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
That's
cool.
cool.
Yeah,
That's a
yeah.
whole different kind of experience, but I think it's
Mhm.
smart too. I think people, yeah, 300 is a lot. Especially with the prices, even
Yeah.
before when they're cheaper, that adds up very
And just
quickly.
like and the physical volume that it would accumulate in my house of like 300, graded. I don't want to deal with that. Like for me, the hobby is
Yeah.
it's not just about like limiting how much money I'm spending, but it's also the space. Like I don't want to devote a ton of space in my house to like store a bunch of cardboard. I don't want to do that. And
Yeah.
so I try to be really careful about, what it was I buy. But one thing I did do in the run up to the pandemic was which I think was really a smart move on my part, or at least I'm happy with it. And afterwards, is that I had actually some pretty solid Griffies, and like I had like a really nice Jeter. I had like a bunch of and a bunch of Trouts that I had
Mhm.
actually had like a pretty nice Trout collection that I had built up. And right around late 2019, I looked at how much it would cost for me to get a Gaudy Babe Ruth. And then I was kind of shocked at how cheap it was. And then I added up all these cards I had, and I was like, look, I can sell these Griffies and Jeters and Trouts, and I,
Mhm.
I can buy a freaking Babe Ruth. I was shocked at the concept of that. And so I bought
Yeah.
my first Gaudy Ruth in like maybe January of 2020 before everything went nuts. And that really changed my collecting, because it took me from being just like a 56 tops collector to like a iconic vintage card collector. And you know it's hard to describe the feeling of holding a card that was like a chewing gum card from 1933, that has Babe Ruth on it, like in your hands. It's kind of an amazing feeling, right? It's like, holy smokes, like this is like a piece of Americana
Wow.
right here, right? It's really
Yeah,
cool.
I haven't graduated to that yet. I do at some point. I want to have one, and I might get there. If I have to move everything I own just to have one, that would probably be the kind of card I'd want to have. I could see myself doing something like that, just to go, okay, this all basically builds to this, and I have all the fun stuff that's graded that's not worth as much, but this is the card, right? I
Yeah.
mean, I think I'm going to shift this whole Grail title to just vintage, because you
Yeah.
you do talk about where we're talking about way more than Mickey, and that's okay. We can just fly on the spot here. The title can be made later, but I know we originally played Mickey Mantle, but we're talking
Mhm.
about so many other things. We're talking about the Grails and the important cards in the vintage time frame, which I think is going to
Mhm.
speak to a lot of those folks that love to collect those types of cards. And I think we need to be talking about it more. We don't. We talk about modern and talk about 90s and all these other great these awesome periods of time, but we don't talk about vintage enough. And so, talking about vintage and Grails, in your mind, what are could you like list out in your mind, top of mind, Grail cards from the vintage market that most vintage collectors will go, yeah, those are the cards, and just despite grade, the
Mhm.
cards.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So, I mean, definitely the 52 tops Mickey Mantle is the top of the mountain for sure. And then, I mean, for me, people talk about the Hannes Wagner, right? But that's not an
It's not
accessible
attainable.
card.
You
It's
can't
not
get it. Yeah.
attainable. So I kind of like put that on a side. So, but I think like a T206 Ty Cobb, that's an attainable card. And it's so cool because you can read newspaper clippings from 1910 that are about kids hounding adults to buy tobacco so that they can find a Ty Cobb card. So, like the experience that I had in 1989 buying Upper Deck cards to try to find Ken Griffey Jr., that was the same exact experience kids had in 1909 trying to find a Ty Cobb. And like holding one of those cards in your hand is
Yeah.
a cool experience. Like it's been through more than a century of time. There weren't top loaders, there was nothing, right? And this
Yeah.
card survived all of that time to end up
It's
in your
amazing.
hands. So yeah, T206 Cobb is the one that I would put on that list. Then you've got the Cracker Jack cards, which are really, really expensive. And the two big ones there are Joe Jackson and
Hmm.
Ty Cobb are really big
Hmm.
cards there. Then moving from there, then you've got the Gaudy set, and there you've got the Babe Ruths, the most famous Babe Ruth cards, and you've got Lou Gehrig. So Lou Gehrig has both the card in 33 and 34. His 34 that's my personal favorite Lou Gehrig card. It's got this cool thing on the back where he talks about how lucky he is to be playing baseball and how he hopes to be doing it for a long time to come. So it's really like foretelling in a tragic way, right? What would happen to him just like, you know, a mere like 4 or 5 years later. And they have a card like that. Like that's a really cool feeling, right? I get goosebumps just thinking about reading the back of that card and like, you know, thinking about being a little kid at that time. Right. So you got those cards. Then another one that I love is the 1941 Play Ball Joe DiMaggio. Right. This was like right before we entered World War II. It's the kind of last like color produced card until you get to 1948 Leaf. Again, they're the big card. Jackie Robinson, his rookie card. Then you've got the 52 Mantle. I always think of the 51 Mays, the 1951 Bowman Mays as one of the all-time great cards. And then after that, I would say you've got I actually was put 1949 Bowman Satchel Paige. Satchel Paige only has 3 cards. And one of them is the 48 Leaf. That's a high number. I think there's like less than 100 of them. They're basically an impossible card. But I'm a huge Negro League baseball fan, and Satchel Paige is such a big part of that story. So I love that card. And then from there, I would go with the 1954 Hank Aaron. Right, Hank Aaron's rookie card is a beautiful orange card.
Absolutely, yeah.
And then I'm a Cubs homer, so I also love the 54 Banks. So those are the ones that I would rattle off, you know, on the spot as like my iconic vintage cards.
So do you feel like vintage keeps going into the 60s, or is that getting to be, you know, sort of Bronze Age, or like, is there, how do you look? People have a different, I mean, people that call 80s vintage is kind of, that's way out of whack. But people that talk about 60s, is that still vintage in your mind?
So I think it depends on sport. So I think basketball, I would say 61 basketball is definitely vintage basketball. But for baseball, I think vintage baseball for me ends at 1980. But the iconic vintage, I think of as like 1956 and earlier. Obviously, like I'm a 1956 kind of guy. That's my name. So for me, so for me, the iconic baseball cards are really 1956 Topps and earlier. But there are some really important cards later, like the Nolan Ryan rookie and things like this. But for me, because the art is such a big part of it for me, that's why I'm really drawn to the cards that aren't photographs, but are really artist renditions. And that's kind of where, at least for me, where I get the most like special feeling, like looking at the cards.
Yeah, I feel like in the 60s, what started happening is you get these like rookie all-star cards where the rookie, the important rookie card is it's coupled with some other random players. You know, unless you're like in the late 70s and like with the Paul Molitor and the Trammell and some of those cards where you have a couple of them on the same card, which is pretty cool. But you got, you know, like you think of Mike Schmidt, you got all these like 73 Topps. So you get these sets where the player, it's not just it's a player and a couple other people. That to me kind of always kind of bugged me, you know, like I'm a huge Johnny Bench guy, right? My dad's favorite player. I've owned a couple different 69 Topps. I've had a 68 and a 69. I had a 69 just recently, a PSA 9. I had to move it to do something else. I never thought I would, but I really had to, which is talk about collecting. I thought I would never move this, but I mean, I figured there's 100 of them. I'll snag another. But I had a PSA 9 recently and then a PSA like 7, you know, at the very beginning. I had to go get that card. It was one of the first ones that I needed to have. But I feel like that 69 Topps, the rookie cup is I know 68 is like rookie card, but with the other guy, it always bugs me. Like I want the one with just him. It looks better, feels better. What are your thoughts on stuff like that in the 60s?
Yeah. So, you know, I think I totally agree with you. Like if someone said, hey, Matthew, like pick your favorite bench card, I would say the 69 Topps with the rookie cup, like by far easily. Same with, I don't really like the Pete Rose rookie. I would rather have his second year card, his 64. Right. The other thing is that like for me, and I think Mantle is emblematic of this point that like I think rookie cards are just too highly weighted in the hobby. Like I don't really, for me as a collector, I try not to be too set, you know, let that drive too much of my thinking. Right. Like the 52 Topps Mantle is the perfect example, right? His rookie card is the 51 Bowman. Like undisputably, that's his rookie card. But if I look at like which card is prettier, which one do I want more? It's the 52 Topps, right?
Yeah.
And I try to apply that same thinking for all the cards I collect, where I try to focus on what card do I think is the prettiest? And maybe that isn't the best like investment choice, because the hobby does love the rookie card. But for me, I mean, I don't, if I want to invest my money, I invested in things that I don't invest it in cards. Cards are fun for me, right? It's something I
Right.
want to enjoy. And when I think about my collection, I always think about, what am I trying to build? What am I going to be happiest with 10 years from now, 20 years from
Mm-hmm.
now?
There you
And
go.
so that's where, have no intent, I have a 1952 Topps mantle. I have no intention of selling that. Like that's the cornerstone card of my collection. And maybe one day there'll come a moment where I upgrade it to someone with maybe better eye appeal or a better grade. But like that I'm not going to turn around on that milestone and take a different path. Like that, I'm going to keep going in that direction.
So why do you, so pretending someone who's watching or listening has no idea why 51 and 52, there's like this desirability over the 52, well over the 51.
Mhm.
Why is that?
Oh man, it's I think it's this combination of things. It has to do with um so obviously 1952 Topps is the first set that Topps put out as a chewing gum card. So they had these kind of like playing cards that are called
Mm-hmm.
redbacks and blackbacks that are from 1951. But 52 was their first real set. And it was like wildly popular among kids like in that time frame. And that coupled with like the hype of Mickey Mantle, this rookie, and how well he would perform in the subsequent years, drove a lot of demand. And so, frankly, for me, it comes down to aesthetics. The populations of the cards are pretty similar. The 52 Topps has a little bit lower population than the 51 Bowman, but it's just a stunning card. Just like, frankly, it's gorgeous. And that for me is the big reason why it's it's
I mean,
it's the one.
that's a 2, and you like
Yeah, it's
you
two.
got a little Mike Baker sticker on there. Shout out to Mike Baker. Missed you at the trade night there, guy. But that thing looks amazing. And this also comes back to there's a conversation I was having with a friend of mine in the hobby about, and he has some vintage cards, some
Mhm.
Gaudis, and he had a mantle, and he's nervous about buying the higher grades now because of some of the trimming and some of
Mhm.
the doctoring might have gone on with some of these vintage cards that are in high grade. And there's a lot of people, there's a handful of, there's a good amount of people out there say anything high grade, it has been tampered, has been, dressed up or manipulated in some way or
Mhm.
form. I mean, what are your thoughts on that? Do you feel like that's prevailing thought in the vintage circles? And is that something to be considering when you're looking at
Yeah.
cards?
Yeah, yeah, it's important to consider. I mean, from my point of view, what's cool about these cards is they were never intended to be valuable. These were children's toys, right? And these were like
Yeah.
meant to be played with, right? There weren't top loader. You don't open a pack really carefully and then like put it in top loader. You would like literally like tape these things to your wall,
I
right?
know.
So it's kind of shocking that cards that were produced in that era there would be PSA 10s, right? It's like kind of a shocking concept that, it's like you look at the 52 Topps mantle, the PSA pop is under 2,000. You got to imagine that like I don't know, millions of those cards were produced, but most of them were destroyed, right? And they were just
Because kids were
destroyed.
playing with
Yeah,
them.
their kids
Yeah.
are playing with them. They were toys, right?
Yeah.
And so at least for me, part of it is that like I don't think I'll ever have the money to buy like a high grade 52 Topps mantle. Um, so I think, my advice to people who are interested in vintage cards, um, to to remember that what you want to buy is the card, not the grade, right? The grade is a thing that
Yeah.
has been assigned by a company. It's helpful because it kind of sets what the valuation should be. But if you look at
Mhm.
the prices realized in vintage cards, there's a huge like this. I have a PSA 2 52 Topps mantle. The range of the prices realized for a 52 mantle and a PSA 2 are huge, and that's because the eye appeal varies so much in that technical grade. And so what you want to do is, we don't know, in 10 years from now, like grading could be entirely different. Like grading could be a completely like robot process, and it could be that some other company comes and wipes PSA out. I don't know. But what I do know is that the card isn't going to change. So I might, get my card graded by some other company, but the card itself isn't going to change. And so that's the thing that you want to buy. And you want to buy something that, you know, strikes your eye as appealing? Like, what is it about the card that appeals to you? And chances are, like, you're not alone in that assessment, right?
Yeah.
And so I think, you know, of course, there's always going to be concern about, you know, whether a card was tampered with, and I don't think any of us can be 100% proof positive that, you know, a card that we have. I'm sure that I have cards that have been. I can't tell. The grading company says they haven't been, but I can't be sure of that. All I can do is try to trust my own eye, right? And like be confident in what I'm doing, and that confidence comes from knowledge and experience.
That is a good point. Sometimes you're just gonna have to. This is what it is. A lot of people say most cards are, and you're looking at a PSA 10, this specific PSA 10s. You just kind of wonder, but I don't know. I feel like that's a rabbit hole you can go down, and it can kind of ruin the experience for you. So I try to not play in that area. So you have 80s cards, I imagine. So it's not vintage technically, and we are kind of deviating from the Grail concept, but we just kind of walk through the Grails. So we're kind of, you know, we'll just this is going to be a combo episode. It's a Grail series episode about vintage, but it's also a little Origin Collectors Series show for you, 1956 ToppsGuy. So in your collection, in your PC, I know the mantle seems to be pretty high on the list. It's like, do you have like a list of cards that matter, that are not like in the 50s or the 40s, and they're not a Ruth or Gehrig or anything like that, but they're like, you know, 1980s cards? Because I think that's where we all kind of started. Like when I first got picking, I went back and got those cards because those are the cards I wanted, you know. And then, you know, I learned about 90s inserts, and then I, you know, the first card I bought was a Griffey, and at the first few cards I bought were all Griffies. I just wanted to get Griffey, and then I got all these other cards, and I bought all these different things, and then and I basically came right back to where I started with Griffey, and I'm like, I'm just going to stay in that lane, and that's what I did. And then a little bit of Kobe, a little bit of David Robinson, who was my favorite basketball player when I was a kid. So I was kind of like, I'm just going to get the cards I love, and his baseball is the focus for me. So 80s, do you have like a specific 80s card? Since you and I are both 80s guys, do you have a card that like I imagine you have the 87 Topps? You've got to have that. You've got to have that Conseco Rookie Cup, right? So you have it in Tiffany, or
no? So that one, I just have the normal like base one. I have it raw. I still have, you know, the I didn't. Nice. That isn't one I went back and bought. So one project that I did that was really fun was I went and I got like a Cubs card. I got one Cubs card for every set from T206 to 1991 Topps Stadium Club, which was a really fun project. So cool.
Wow.
Yeah. You get to see the evolution of cards, just one card from every set. And, you know, in that process, one card that I found in love with was, it's the 1984 Donruss Ryan Sandberg.
That's a nice card.
That's a cool card. It actually uses this really funky photography technique where if you ever look at it, you should bring up a picture of it. So,
do it.
What you'll see is that the like Sandberg himself is in focus, but and you can see like the fans behind him, and they're all out of focus. And it has it's kind of this really cool photographic effect that was used in several cards in that set. It looks really cool. It's a really cool card, and it's like you could get a really nice one for like $15.
I know. There's an eBay. I gotta try to Skype someone's eBay. Let's go over here to Mr. Sports Card Investor Guy. We'll just pull up the card.
Here, maybe I can get my Flickr going too if you got it. Okay.
No, I don't want to do that. There you go. How's that? Let me oh, I'm not presenting. Whoops, I'm the other one. Present. Hold on. Sorry. Whoopsie daisies here. We'll do that and select the tab. I selected it. It's going to share here. Window, entire screen. Nope. Tab. Oh.
You got it?
I'm getting there.
You got it? Okay.
It's just not working like I'd like.
That's okay. So so what you'll see is that Sandberg himself is in focus. All of the fans, everything around him are very, very out of focus. They just look like these blobs. And I think the style of photography, it's called catadioptric bokeh. And so there's a few cards that have this, and it looks amazing. It's a very cool looking card. And so now I'm kind of like, you know, what I'm thinking is, should I try to find like an in-person autographed version of this 84 Donruss Sandberg?
Oh, nice.
It's okay if you can't get it.
Yeah, I don't know what's going on. I was trying to trying to find the right way to do this, but it's I'm looking at it too. I mean, folks, if you want to, go find it, you can go find it. It's pretty. Yeah, for some reason, it's not letting me do it. I don't know what's going on here.
Yeah, I can share screen if you want me to do it.
Yeah, go ahead, do it. Sure, let's look at it because I was looking at it. It's a very interesting card. It is. It makes me want to go get it now, honestly, because I forgot how cool looking that is.
All right, so here we go. So we're looking at my Flickr album here. So can you see it?
That's even better. Yeah, I can see them. Yeah.
All right, so you can see, right? These are all these cards from like T206 up to the 80s here. So here we go. There's the 84. There's the 84 Don Ross Sandberg. So you see how like he's in focus really nicely here, but
yeah,
everything around him looks like these weird circles. It's just this cool photographic effect, and they use that in a few cards in 1984 Don Ross, one of them being the Sandberg. So that's a really cool one from the 80s for me. Love that one.
It is, and it's a cool iconic set too. I mean, that set matters.
Yeah, with the Mattingly.
The Mattingly has that provenance in the hobby. It's second year Sandberg. Look, they're talking about last sold for 97. Yeah, it's I think like some of those cards from the 80s, like and the pops are the thing that bothers me to this day about the 80s cards and the price fluctuation. It's a lot of them. It's the pop.
Mm-hmm.
The pop report kind of drives the value of the card versus the card driving the value itself. Like the card being like, you go into like these vintage and 50s and 40s, the card itself is just worth money. Just this without a grade assigned, that card, it has intrinsic value for the fact that you even just have you can hold it in your hand. It's still there. It survived. There it is. Like me with the 90s stuff, there's the serial number sought after. There's only so many, especially when you can learn about the backdooring and sheet cutting. If you can eliminate a lot of that, even, and you can get just one of those, to me, that, the grade, who cares? The grader doesn't matter. The card matters. So I think that's the 80s. That's what scares me away from trying to get into like getting a PSA 10 set. Like I got a bunch of PSA 10s at one point, and I just moved them all into, the Griffey stuff. But that's the one thing that kind of bothered me, and even the Ken Griffey Jr., the 89. I mean, I had a 10 at one point, but I'm like, you're not going to always go get one. And there's just so many of them. And
so I mean, okay. But the thing is that, like, from an enjoyment perspective, like, I derive a lot of enjoyment from looking at those 80s cards. And so the way that I approach is the same way I approach a 50s vintage card, in the sense that, like, okay, I'm going to kind of try to pretend like I'm not looking at the grade and just get something that I think looks really nice. So like
looks nice. The registration's there, for the card.
And the centering is like bang on. So like my Sandberg, right? I was like, I could kind of pay out the nose for a 10 of that 84 Sandberg, but I could also just like get a 9 that to my eye, I don't need to get out a freaking microscope to like look at the card to determine if it's a 9 or a 10, right? It looks really nice to me. And then it's really cheap. And like it might not be that card's going to 10x in 20 years, but like, that's not why I'm buying it, right? I'm buying it because I'm like, it brings me a lot of enjoyment to own it, right?
And like, so just go get like a mint, near mint to a mint collection of all those cards. And
like I collect Jordan. So I collect Jordan, and I don't buy his expensive stuff. I buy the cards that I think like look really cool, but I buy them in like PSA 8 because I can get a really nice looking card there that isn't going to break the bank, but it still gets me that cool feeling of like, oh, cool, I own that Jordan that I had when I was a kid, and it looks awesome. Like the one I always think about is like the All-Star one where he's dunking from the free throw line. Like there's a jillion printed of that card, right? But it's very hard to find one that's centered, but you can find like a centered 7 or an 8, and it's pretty cheap. And it's that's an iconic Michael Jordan card in my mind because it's an iconic moment.
It is. For a second there, I kind of got, I was inspired to maybe do an 87 sticker set, just go get it in like 7s or something like that. Cause you can go get them for like, because I was at an LCS and there's like, there's like 6 or 7 of them there already there, graded 7. You can buy them each for like $10 a piece. It was like nothing. No, we didn't want anything for them. But you're like, I can just put together a 7 set and try to just find the best 7s you can find. And then, and then you have to go on, but then you go on eBay and everybody wants all this money. It's like, why do you want so much for the 7? And then it gets kind of ruins the fun. But there is something to that. I mean, finding the card that looks the best, finding the iconic stuff, but not worrying about the grades so much. That's good. That's a good point. That's a really good point. Well taken. Hey, this has been a blast. I appreciate you taking time to jump on. Yeah. So like, and where are you? Or do you jump on podcasts very often? Are you associated with anybody, or are you just an Instagram guy posting your stuff? Like, where do we find you if we want to find you after the show?
Yes, I'm mostly on Instagram at 1956ToppsGuy. A few vintage buddies and I have a podcast that we do. We do an Instagram live every 3 weeks or so, and
Nice.
then we record it and put it out as a podcast. It's called we call it Rough Cuts, because
Nice.
vintage cards often have a rough cut because they weren't cut with the very precise
Nice.
cutting tools. So so we do that,
Nice.
and yeah, I really
Cool.
really appreciate you having me on here. Love talking about vintage cards, and I really love, if people want to talk to me, get my opinion about whatever card, this or that, happy to share the things that I've learned.
Of course. Well, thank you so much, Matthew, 1956 Topps Guy. We talked about Mansell. We talked about Grail stuff. We talked about his collection. Kind of wrapped it all into one episode. This is a collector's series. It's a collector's episode. I try to make it all about that for the most part. So there's no real rules. We just talk about cards. So thank you so much for jumping on. Anybody have comments or questions, just throw it in the comment section below. Like, subscribe, all that stuff. Go find Matt on Instagram and follow him. Jump on the Rough Cuts live if you can. If you're into vintage, I hope you are. I'm glad we're finally able to talk and focus some attention on that segment of the market and the collector base, because I know so many people do, and they're so passionate about it. And it's such a cool segment of the hobby. I'm fascinated by all of the hobby, and this particular segment with baseball, to me, that speaks to my heart. So thank you so much for taking time tonight to talk vintage cards and Mickey Mantle and Grails and everything else.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dennis. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, sounds good. Well, we'll see you guys all next week, and we'll have another show for you. I'm not really sure who's going to be there yet, but we'll figure it out. Anyway, everybody have a safe evening or day, or whenever you find this episode. Probably going to find it on Saturday. We're recording this a little bit earlier, but again, like and subscribe, comment below, and Matt will get down there and answer any questions you might have, as well as myself. And have a great hobby experience. Take